Good day. It's September 7th. It's Friday, 2018. As you can see, I'm not in the room anymore. I'm out in my van. Right now, at the moment, living out of my van, but I'm under a nice tree here. And I'm going to try explaining one more video a little bit more in depth, and I'm going to attempt to say what my guess is why I've never been able to be interviewed, not just on radio and TV and stuff like that, but even on the internet programs. Some will consider me, and then well, one example I'll give you is one. They were almost going to put me on one night as a fill-in, and they decided not to, and they had some guy on there that didn't make any sense at all. Of course, some people might say I might not make any sense. But finally, after weeks of talking and negotiations and setting things up, the gal, the producer, says, well, frankly, your material is just too overwhelming. And it just kind of blew me away. But really, she was probably being more exposing the truth than anyone, really. Because, well, the way I look at it, if somebody gets off track, or a bunch of people get off track, and somebody tries to steer them back on track, or tell them, what their problem is, it can be quite overwhelming to those people that are off track but think that they're on track. So anything can be overwhelming if it's not in the dimensions that you're used to, your surroundings, what you're familiar with. It can be overwhelming. Traffic can be overwhelming sometimes. So you get my point. So I'm going to talk more on the four states of the two, Satanic, Luciferian, and then the other, which I've said is kind of truth-seeking. Now, you can use different words for this, but the point I want to make, and that I've made before, is that there's a difference between Satanism and Luciferianism. And it's like Lucifer was the brother to Jesus or Yahshua, and the Satanics are those entities, those people that got so far out of line with their creator that they basically got imprisoned here on the planet. A lot of people refer to those as demons, and a lot of spirit contacts are demons, whether the people want to admit it or not. But these can be living entities too, people, and they're more in the category of personhood. And if you get far enough into that, and far enough numbered, and far enough into the mark of the beast, you've set yourself up to be abandoned on this planet after you pass on. Now, that might be fine, you're still here, and you don't have to eat, and you can float around, and you can be free in a sense, but you're no longer connected with the universe. That might be difficult for some of you to understand that. And I'm not being judgmental here, but some persons can be pretty nice people, but they're so hooked into the system, so encapsulated by the system, that they're going to end up being far from our Creator's laws. And on the other hand, the Luciferians, even those that have fallen far enough where they're eating babies and drinking blood, some people will say, well, how can they still be connected to the universe? And here's this nice guy over here that's connected into the system real completely, and he's going to be abandoned. You know, how can that be? I'm just telling you, like what I've come to understand it to be. I prefer to explain this under the terms the Enlil and Enki, which are the Sumerian texts, and the Sumerian way of looking at it. It's not quite as confusing as the Christian method, because see, under the Christian you've got the Lucifer and Yahshua, and these are the two opposite brothers, and under a certain period of time under the earth where we follow Lucifer, and other periods we follow Yahshua. And it's the same way with the Sumerians, with Enki and Enlil. Now I'm purposely not going to say which is which. One is the one who sided with man, and the other is the one who stayed with God's laws, the Creator. And those two had a dispute, and a lot of people get mad and don't hear what I'm saying because they want to look as one of those two brothers as being the good guy, and they generally say the one that was sided with mankind was the good guy. And that's the one that saved Noah, gave the instructions to Noah because he didn't want to see mankind destroyed to such an extent that that God was going to kind of recycle the earth and get rid of all the evil. So can you kind of see there that the similarities, not just similarities, but the same under the Christian, under Lucifer and Jesus. So that's why it's confusing. But what we have today, and maybe what we had back then, is we have personhood. And these are no longer men and women, they are persons. And this is the big push today. Not only are you supposed to give up your men and women status, but you're supposed to give up your sex. And this reminds me, I'm going to bring up my earlier video where I said there were two sides to the Satanists, two sides to the personhood. And that's one where they practice Satanism, or practice personhood, practice corporatocracy. And that other side, which pushes it and says it tries to convert you to personhood, to corporatism, to Satanism. It's like a religion, you know. I'm all for freedom of religion, and that's great. But when certain religions come after me and say, oh, you've got to be, you know, they're preaching to me or preaching to the others and saying that you've got to be under this religion. See, that's the difference between pushing, and in some countries you have laws where you've got to be that religious order. See, that's not only preaching, but it's forceful. So that's the difference, the big difference between being one, practicing that, and then wanting everybody else to become that. Understand? So that's what I meant by the Satanists under negative positive, and those under negative negative. The negative ones are the ones that push it and want everybody to convert to them. That's that sine curve again, the sine wave, the 4 that I talked about in my other video. And then the other half of that is the Luciferians and the Yahshua Hamashyites. And that would be like the Enlils and the Enkis. So I hope that's straightened that up. I want to also throw in there the UFO thing, or the return of our forefathers, and how this lines up with what happened in the 20s and 30s. And some of this, what I'm telling you, is extended down from the Vril Society, which was a German nationalist society. Now, that was not Nazi, and a lot of people don't understand that throughout, well, all the time, you've got the strongly nationalist people in a country, and then you've got new orders that come up, and that's what happened with Germany. You had the Nazis coming to power, and they more or less ran things, well, up to a point, and then the SS, which was like the super Nazis, ran things. And by the end of World War II, there was a war going on in Germany between the Nazis and the nationalists. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. And actually, the present Zionists, the Jews that were trying to set up Israel as a nation, were actually in cahoots with the Nazis up at a higher level. And that's why George Soros, who was a Jew, sold out a lot of his fellow Jews and worked with the Nazis. And the same today. You've got the current Nazi movement, which some people more or less understand it to be the Bush cabal, and George Soros pushing the re-Nazification of Ukraine, which is eastern Ukraine, and the Antifa movement, which the symbols are quite similar to the Nazi symbols if you'll look at their symbol. And then even some of the speeches are purposely word for word of certain Nazi speeches, and they're giving it, and all these young people are going, yay, 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 this is, our future and everything. And it's a joke on them, because the people up on top are picking these Nazi speeches to give at these rallies, and the Antifa people are going, oh yeah, 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 yeah. And a lot of them are against, call it skinheads, and a lot of these people Nazis, and here they're the ones that are preaching and trying to convert people into becoming Antifa members. But a lot of that is just money going into it, and it's supported by George Soros and those type of people that have a lot of money. And it's the same to a smaller degree with the liberal movement, the Democrat movement today, and the left, or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot more money funneling in there, and the poor people are getting paid to vote and paid to do things at certain meetings and campaigns. And I even answered an ad in Craigslist for $10 an hour when I was in Colorado, and it's in other states too. And I tried to get them to tell me where their money came from, because $10 an hour to work is not bad wages. And they said, well, it's from small donators. There's too many to number. And also, part of your job is to collect more money. But the more I looked into it, it didn't look like they were collecting a lot of money. But as you worked your way up, it got what was initially told you as a neutral political party. It got more and more left. and more radicalized. And anyway, that's some interesting history about current politics. And the same with the Tea Party. That I hung around them and went to a couple of their rallies. Just probably the second year they were, really growing, and I could tell right there that it was already infiltrated. And people that are more aware realize how the Tea Party's been taken over by the money people, which is the left. And they do this with all the parties because they want to control both parties. So they're elite, the powers that be, put money into all the different parties to the degree, the size they are, so they can control the parties. Okay, getting back to the UFO thing, which does tie in here, the return of our forefathers, Yahshua and his band. And there was much contact with the Germans, probably began in the late 20s and throughout the 30s. And there was contact here in this country in the 40s, the late 40s. And then you've got, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Greada Treaty, the Greada Treaty. It's, I first heard about it in the 80s, and I thought it was just a story. But over the decades, the more I re-look at it, I think that there was really something to it. And that was basically Eisenhower, I think it was somewhere around 54, it might have been 1953, met with a group of so-called aliens, the Greys, and made a deal with them for technology, for advanced technology, a little bit, and that the other side of the deal was that the Greys could take cattle and a few other cell samples because they were having an issue with procreation. Their race was dying, and their race was basically Satanics. They had gone their way, the tree of good and evil, and totally gotten away from the Creator's laws. And this is where Monsanto's is taking you today. And that's why I said in an earlier video that these people, if Monsanto's wins, you people out there that have followed Monsanto's and ate their products and consumed enough of their poisons, that you will eventually become, your children's children will become Greys, a couple 100 years from now, or half dozen or something. It's all relative. But see, in a sense, they're the Satanics of today on their future timeline. Now, we don't have to go that timeline, but if Monsanto's wins and other people like, or other corporations like Monsanto's, you're going to end up abandoned from the Creator's laws. And that's like persons being abandoned on earth after they die. Whereas even Luciferians, they go somewhere, whether you want to call it hell or a lower heaven, but they go off planet. And in a sense, most all people on earth today are Satanists in a way that the earth has been quarantined from the rest of the universe. And that's why there's very limited communication, and I mean very limited, with off-planet. So that's saying a lot there, and that may be what people don't want to talk about on on interviews. It gets too scary. It's these stories of bloodsuckers and what do they call them? Zombies. We're a lot more like zombies than you realize, and that's why the interest of all these zombie movies. You've got the empire, the system, the corporation out of the City of London is, in a sense, a bunch of zombies. They've got to keep getting more and more people incorporated into their corporation, their one world order, their new world order, which is just a further implementation of the old world order, the Roman law, or Roman codes. It's debt. It's based on debt, so you've got to get more and more suckers into the debt system in order to extend it. Because if you don't keep extending it, getting more zombies, the whole thing collapses. And it's simple mathematics. It's science. You can't argue it. It's math. And I've explained that in my earlier videos. And getting back to the President Eisenhower, you had him meeting. I don't really know when it happened, whether it was 52 or earlier, back in 47, somewhere along that line. He met with the Forefathers, and the Forefathers told him this is the way it is, and you have to buckle down and abide by just a few universal laws, which were basically constitutional. This is what the founding fathers of this nation set the Constitution up according to universal laws. The 10 Bill of Rights were kind of a different version, but the same thing as the 10 Commandments. And you got away from that during the Civil War, and that's when 14th citizenship, the 14th Amendment, got passed, and that was corporate citizens. That was the beginning of personhood. Now, somebody, since I said the Supreme Court made corporations equal to men and women, somebody told me that that actually happened back in the 1880s or late 1870s, and it may be true, but what it was, it's increments, because it actually started in the War 1812, got really implemented with the 14th Amendment just after the Civil War, and then got even more cemented with the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 and the introduction of the Little Brother, which was the IRS, and then even further than after the 29 crash, which was mathematically had to happen, and that was only 20 years after the implementation of the Federal Reserve Act. And we had the bankruptcy of the United States, 1933 or 34, something like that. And then when we came out of bankruptcy, which was basically just a rollover of the debt, because corporations can get out of bankruptcy. They don't really go through full bankruptcy. They just get a new name, and that's why your names on all your two-dimensional paperwork are capital letters. That's your new name according to the empire, according to the City of London, according to the one corporation. So that's a lot I just fed you, and maybe you better go to sleep or just sit there and digest it. I think that's basically what I wanted to talk about. I'm sure there's a few other things that fill it in. But yeah, you wouldn't believe all the people that have turned me down for interviews. I've given up. In fact, I probably won't even want to do any if some come after me. There's enough information out there if you really want to learn, and the people that want to learn are the only ones that are going to get anywhere. One thing I might add, I got into all this because as a high school student, a young high school, an early high school, that's when JFK, John Kennedy, was the president, was assassinated. And the more I studied that, because I didn't buy it even the first few months, I could see, Oswald, he may have been involved, but he wasn't the one that really did it. And so those people got away with that, and they continued to bump people off and do bigger and bigger things, and their people eventually pulled off 9/11, and they're the ones that bailed everybody out, or the bankers, not the people. The bankers got bailed out in 2008, and they're covering up how bad things are right now. But people, even though so many people know that the media is lies, 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 they still hear a lot of the media, so they're thinking, well, this is still sort of the way it is, and it really isn't. And most of the people out there know it to different degrees. But you don't realize how many people don't believe it. And you're still listening even to Fox News, which is supposed to be the more truthful of the ones. They may give a little bit more truth, but they're still basically snowballing you. And just a week or so ago, they took off RT off the TVs, and you can still get it on the internet. But I don't know. Well, I hope this has helped you. Bye. Take care.